In short, any problem that I've ever had, drinking was pretty much involved.
Didn't have a care in the world. And then, found opiates.
I think I really just had fear of getting sober. I think that was I didn't know how to live any other way. Drugs and alcohol were my solution.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Addiction Talk. We are so glad that you joined us this evening because every time we bring Addiction Talk to you, we're bringing important conversations that we need to be talking about when it comes to addiction and recovery. And we have a special treat tonight. We have a very special guest with us coming on tonight. And you saw a little glimpse of her. We were just giving you a sneak peek. But we have Miss Tawny Lara with us tonight. And just to give you a little bit of a background of Miss Tawny Lara, she is the host of the Recovery Rocks podcast. She's also the founder of SobrieTea Party, which is a play on the term. I love it. She's also been dubbed the Sober Sexpert. So y'all know we are going to dive all in on tonight's conversation because she has a lot to say. So welcome, Miss Tawny. How are you today?
Hi, Joy. I'm good. How are you?
Great. We're so glad you joined us because when we came across your blog and all that you're doing and, sharing your story and stuff like that, we said we have to have you on the show because you have such an interesting perspective and just all that you're doing to raise awareness. So thank you.
Happy to be here. And thank you for what you're doing to raise awareness.
Yeah, so we want to get right into this. So one of the things that really struck me, Tawny, about your story, and I think it's not uncommon for a lot of people, is you struggled with denial. I know you suffered with alcohol addiction. And interestingly enough, we have you on during Alcohol Awareness Month. But you struggled for so long to come to terms with that you were struggling with alcohol addiction. Why do you think you were in denial so long about what you were going through?
Yeah, that's such an important question. I just thought I was a party girl who liked having a good time. I was a career bartender and I hung out with other career bartenders, and that's just what I did. I drank the way that we drank. So I didn't really think much of it. I was just like, this is just how people drink. Once I started to hang out with people that were not also in the bartending scene, that's when I really started to realize, oh, okay, maybe everyone doesn't want to take a shot on Tuesday night, so that really kind of opened up my eyes. But I honestly thought that I had to look like what Hollywood and the media portrayed as a rock bottom in order to get sober or even realize I had a drinking problem, because I didn't look anything like that. I was in college, I was working full time. I was a fitness instructor. I was never late to anything. I was fully functioning. And in Hollywood, they show, you lose everything before you get help. And that's some people's reality, but that doesn't tell the whole story.
No, that's so good. And I love that you said that, Tawny, because many people, that's what often keeps them from getting help, because they're like, well, I'm still functioning. I can still take my kids to do certain things, or I'm still living my life. So I don't have a problem. So I know you said once you started hanging out with people outside the bar scene, was there a moment that said, this is not normal? This is not, that there's something going on here?
Absolutely. I got more into the yoga community, and some friends and I from the yoga studio would go out for, a drink after class. And, most people would have one drink or maybe not even finish their full drink. But I would have multiple drinks, and I would go to the bar and come back with a round of shots, and people would look at me why? Why? They looked at me like I had two heads, which, in my former life, that was just what you did. Everyone kind of takes turn buying rounds of shots. And there's all not to put that down. If you celebrate and you can drink alcohol normally with a round of shots, all to you. I was not one of those people who could drink responsibly. And that moment was just really, really hit me. And I got sober about a year after that. But that was the moment that I was like, something is a little off here.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you drinking to the point of blackout? what were the other things that were going on in your life that if somebody is listening to your story and is in that denial place, that might be an indication to them that they might have a problem?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, Hollywood shows addiction or substance abuse in a certain way. Someone who wakes up and there's a bottle of whiskey on their nightstand and they have to start drinking every morning to function. That wasn't my story at all. I could go days, weeks, months without drinking. Even though I usually drank several times a week, I could go longer. But when I did drink, I drank until I blacked out. Like that was just, it wasn't like, hey, let's drink till we black out tonight. It was just the habit. It was the behavior of it was binge drinking. That is what is called binge drinking. And I just, that was my life, a couple nights a week. And, I never really saw much point in having one beer or one glass of wine. It never made any sense to me. Even still in sobriety, when I see, if I'm having dinner with a friend and they get a glass of wine and they don't finish it, I'm just like, why did they even buy that? My mind still works that way.
Do you think it's kind of, when you think about the people who were around you at the time, do you think anybody realized what was going on? Or do you think we're so in our culture these days, alcohol has become such a big part of it that you have so many people who have a problem but are able to kind of slide under the radar because it's normalized? Excessive drinking is normalized.
It is. And I think as a society, we are moving more toward mindfulness. And I think that's with, the westernization of yoga and, people are eating less meat, people are drinking less alcohol. It's also generational, like more millennials are drinking less than ever people our age. So, and I think it's part of the information age where it's like, we want to know what's in our food. We want to know what's in the drinks that we're consuming. And a lot of people are approaching, the sober curious conversation just because they're like, maybe I should drink a little bit less, or they're becoming more aware of when they are reaching for a glass. Whereas before it was I feel like black and white. It's either like you drink and you get wasted or you go to AA. And at least in my world, it was those two options, where now there's so much more nuance that I think is just so great.
So, one of the things I think was interesting is, what was it that you said from that moment you had the realization that I'm drinking a lot, I'm buying these rounds, maybe something's going on. It took you a year, you said, to actually decide to get help. What was it in that made you wait to that year? What was it in that year that said, let me try something different, let me get help?
In that year, I went through a lot of big changes. Like I, traveled internationally for the first time. I moved to New York City. I grew up in Texas, so I moved to New York City to pursue my writing career. And those were two really big mind expanding things that happened in my life. And once I moved to New York and I was, taking a lot of writing classes and hanging out with other writers, I found myself, no longer in the bar scene. I was drinking less, though I was still drinking until I blacked out, but those nights were few and far between. I had this moment of realization. Like, I was just like, alcohol just really isn't amplifying my life in any sort of way. And, I told myself, like, though I was taking writing classes and, in the community, I still didn't think I was writing enough. So it was like, there was this day in a pub in Soho, and something about that day, I realized, you just spent 4 hours in a pub saying you don't have time to write. Like there's something here. So like
going on, right?
Yeah. Like I think there might be a correlation. So the next morning I woke up and I didn't drink. I was like, I'm not going to drink for a week. I'm not going to drink for 2 weeks. And then my 30th birthday was coming up. And I thought, why don't I not drink for a year and just see what happens? And that's why I started the blog, SobrieTea Party, just to really hold myself accountable. And here we are 5.5 years later.
So it all started, did you have to actually go to treatment or get any help in addition to just deciding you were going to stop drinking?
I did not get, I started seeing a therapist, and, it took me a little while to find a support group that worked for me, but I didn't go to treatment. I kind of did my own thing through, reading a lot of books helped me. Like reading sober memoirs really helped me. Like, I think as a writer, that was just kind of like how I digested information. And therapy, support groups, yoga, that was and is my path.
Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting because a lot of people in recovery, they often have their own path. I know for a lot of people, treatment is a big deal, which is what we offer here at American Addiction Centers. You find some people just go directly to AA. So it's interesting to see how everyone finds their path. But I think the thing that you're saying that's so important is that you find that path and that you realize that something's going on. And I love, Tawny, that you also incorporated the therapy, because as I was learning more about you, it was going through that therapy that you begin to see a correlation between some of the things that you were dealing with mentally and your drinking. What did you discover as you started going to therapy and digging deeper as to what was going on with you?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because the two are so ingrained for me, and a lot of other people. Substance abuse is inherently often tied to mental health issues. And, as a teen, I was diagnosed with depression. And then I developed anxiety, and I tried to, my whole self-destructive path, because I was self-medicating these mental health issues. And I just was kind of living in this alternate reality that I had created because I couldn't deal with the real world. I created this like drunken echo chamber. And so once I started seeing a therapist, I realized that I have some things I need to deal with. I have some repressed trauma. I have some, I have mental health. I have anxiety. I have depression. Like these are the reasons I drank. And these issues didn't go away. Something I want to clarify, once you get sober, everything doesn't get, instantly better. If anything, it can get a little bit harder because you're no longer self-medicating. You're no longer numbing.
So you have to deal with all
you have to deal with it.
That's gotta be huge.
And
huge.
You're present all the time. And that's like, while I am grateful for, being present in the moment, it's also this feeling of like, there's no more like having a drink and just kind of like checking out for a minute. It's just like you're present all the time, and you're dealing with like life is going to happen all the time. And there's nothing you can do other than control how you react to it. And that's something that one of the many things I'm learning in recovery.
Well, that's so huge. And I just love all the comments that are coming in saying amazing, that you could get sober by yourself, that you were, you did have help. You did have the therapy. So we do want to mention that and some support. So, but it's amazing, people hearing your story are really being touched tonight. But I love what you said, Tawny, is, realizing that the alcohol was a numbing, was a coping mechanism for you. And so all those years, you didn't even realize that the depression, the anxiety, and other things, you would turn to the alcohol because it helped you. And that has to be huge. So how are you learning to cope now? Many people who find themselves, like you said, now I have to live in the present. I have to live in the reality of how I'm feeling in this moment. What have you learned in terms of coping strategies that maybe you could share with someone tonight?
I am a big fan of acupuncture. That seriously helps so much physically and mentally. I want to say meditation, but I have such a love-hate relationship with it. I'm not currently meditating at the moment, but I'll get back. I know that helps a lot of people. Having some sort of, exercise, whether, I run, yoga, having, you have this pent up energy. So having a way to get it out. So, or even if it's like some sort of creative hobby. For me, it's writing, which is, not my hobby, it's a career, but, having some sort of creative outlet, whether it's painting or, like I'm learning Spanish, like hobbies, crafts, diving into these other parts of yourself can be so beneficial, because once you stop drinking, you find you have so much more time, and you find out who your real friends are, which is a really tough part of sobriety.
Well, you lost some friends there, Tawny?
I learned who my friends were and who my drinking buddies were. And
there was a difference.
There was a difference. And there's, I haven't like lost any friends, but you just kind of naturally, like when you only have drinking in common with someone, and one of you stops drinking, that, it kind of fizzles, and it's like no hard feelings, but it just kind of happens.
Yeah, that's deep. And I love what you talked about, is finding an outlet or finding something creative. And I think when you talk about how writing, even though you do writing as your profession, but writing seemed to be really therapeutic for you. What did you find even in doing your blog and writing and just sharing, even if you didn't share it with anybody else? How was writing such an instrumental thing for you and just processing what you were going through?
Writing, still to this day, it's almost like I don't understand how I feel about something until I write about it.
Ooh, that's good.
It's like, it sounds weird, but like, I'm a big fan of what a writing teacher named Ruth Dannon gave me the best advice. She said, let yourself write bad. And that is, I want to get it tattooed, honestly, because it's the best advice. And I think you could apply that to any creative. Let yourself paint bad, let yourself whatever, which means let yourself make mistakes, right? So, in sobriety, it just really like having this blog that was like a living diary of what I was going through. I kept up with it really like those first 4 years. I've been sober for 5.5 years now, and it's turned more into, my writing has turned into more like freelance pieces and, things like that. But, I wouldn't recommend starting a blog to document your sobriety, because it's
maybe a personal journey.
It's pretty messy. It's pretty messy. And I look back at some of those early blog posts and I cringe, but I honestly like that I have that to reflect on, of like, oh, wow, you've grown a lot since then. Like, good for you, girl.
I love what you're saying about that, because I think that's a good piece of wisdom for people who are out there listening tonight. If you're in recovery or someone who's struggling, that writing can help you get in tune with what you're really feeling. And I thought that's deep that you said, Tawny, that you didn't even know how you were truly feeling until you wrote, until you started writing. And then what I love that you said is that you were able to connect it, like to be able to go back and see how far you come, because recovery, I'm sure, has been a journey for you, girlfriend. So just being able to have that, I know, has been really instrumental for you. And I heard you're now writing your own memoir. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so I'm writing a book. It's part social critique. It's mostly social critique with, some personal experiences in there too. And it's really about the intersection of sobriety and sexuality, which I know you and I will get into in a moment. But that is really become my niche in the online sober space. Is I write a lot about sex and sobriety, dating and sobriety, relationships and sobriety. I didn't realize how much alcohol impacted my dating and sex life until I got sober. And the more I talk about it and write about it and interview other people, even if they're still drinking alcohol, alcohol has a really big part in our sex and dating lives. Whether you're sober or you still drink, it's inextricably linked to a lot of people. And I think it's that trope of liquid courage that I would love us to get away from.
Yeah, well, I never even thought how much of an impact that could have. But I know a lot of people talk about, once you get sober, like even just sober sex, and we're going to go there tonight. So I'm hoping they're all adults in the room. But, even when it came to sober sex, and you talk about this, that intimacy was different. What did you find? What did you have to process and deal with? Or you find that others have to process and deal with when you go from having sex when you're inebriated to now you're in a whole different lifestyle and navigating sex?
It's, for me, sobriety equals honesty. And so when, I had to get sober, or I had to get honest with myself to get sober, right? Like I had to be like, something's off here. You need to step back. You need to examine some things. So that requires like a lot of self-awareness. And I would even say confidence, to dare to live your life without alcohol. So like when you apply that to like sex and dating, like that, you don't need liquid courage. You are like, if you take a stand for your physical and mental health, that is so much confidence and I don't think people realize that, because even people that still drink alcohol that they need a glass of wine before they are intimate with their partner, or they take a shot before going on a first date. These are the things that are really ingrained, but then in us, in society. But once you stop drinking, you can't do that. You can't have a glass of wine to relax before you are intimate with your partner. You can't take a shot before you go on a date. So what do you do? And that's really what I am exploring in writing this book. But
and what do you find that people are doing, or what do you find that they have to do, or are you hearing as you're talking to people that this is really a big deal to them when they're dealing with their sobriety?
It is a huge deal. And it's something that is not talked about too often, where, in the traditional 12-step model, we're told to not have sex or date for a year. And if you're in a relationship, then no big changes, because, the first year of sobriety can be really tough. And I totally get that. And I respect why a lot of people do go that year. But what fascinates me is like, okay, so let's say you go that year, then what? So it's like, okay, you waited a year, you got to know yourself, and you're still on this, never ending journey of recovery. So then what? Then how do you go on a date? Then how do you have sex with your partner? How do you bring up wanting to try something new in the bedroom? Well, there's no guidebook for those conversations. And I think they're so important.
Mm-hmm. And I can imagine that. And, as we were getting ready for the show, I know, Tawny, you and I were talking, and we said, even from dating sober is a whole new thing. So we talked about the sexuality and dealing with, having that sex conversation and dealing with that. But even dating, you say, is challenging. And I thought I'd love to have you give some advice to people, because of course you've been coined the Sober Sexpert. But when it comes to dating and somebody who's dealing in recovery are finding themselves in this new life, how do you tell people right away? Do you wait until you're close with the person? How do you begin to navigate that? And if you had to give some tips tonight, what would you say?
Such a good question. And I do have a partner now, and but I did have my fair share of sober dating. I think there's a couple different ways you can do it. One is you can put sober on a dating profile, that's how it is these days. It's all apps and profiles. So, you could put sober on your dating profile. And I honestly think that I prefer that, because I see it as weeding out people. It's a filter where people that might feel threatened by sobriety, they're going to swipe left, and you're not going to waste your time. And then there's also, you can go on a couple dates with someone and then tell them that you're sober. And while that is a valid option, I felt like that wasted my time.
Mm-hmm. And why do you feel like it wasted your time doing it that way?
Because your sobriety is a mirror for a lot of people, that if someone has a normal relationship with alcohol, they're not going to have any issues with your sobriety. They're honestly not, they're going to be like, okay, cool. So like, what do you want for dessert? It's not going to be that big of a deal. But if it was a very big red flag for me when someone had lots of questions, or they wanted to explain their relationship to alcohol with me, then I became their therapist. And I'm like, oh God, I did not sign up for this. Like, this is a date.
I was going on a date.
Yeah. Like, yes, I'm sober, but it's also like such a small part of me. I'm also like, we could talk about writing and growing up in Texas and how I love tortillas. And there's so many other things we can talk about. So that's why I say I preferred putting it on my profile because it was a filter. So it's, neither one is better. There's pros and cons to both. So I don't know. That's not really advice.
You give a good perspective, because I love that you say that, hey, if you're someone that you're new into your recovery and you want to just put it out there, because then the people who you're connecting with are already aware of it. But also be mindful, like you said, if you start in this dating, that it can be a mirror and challenge other people who are in denial to have to deal with themselves. And you said that can, open up a can of worms in terms of what you deal with. But I love that you also said that there were so many people who did have challenges with alcohol, who were very supportive and like, hey, okay, you're sober. What's for dessert? And I love that, because that shows that there are people out there who get it, and that you can be yourself and you can be honest about those things in conversation. So I love that you said that. And one of the things also, Tawny, that I wanted to touch on is when you got real with yourself, and you said you had, you're dealing with your emotions, the mental health that you would experience, the depression and anxiety, but then you also found this new part of yourself. You say that getting sober helped you to get in touch with your sexuality. And tell me about that, because for years you did not know, I guess, potentially, or had come to terms with that you were bisexual. So tell me how the being in sobriety or being in recovery kind of led you to finally admit that to yourself.
Yeah. I had always dated men and women, but there was this, I had this almost imposter syndrome of, you're not bisexual enough. And which is something that is very common in bisexuality. Part of it is how it used to be represented until very recently, where, even on such a progressive show like Sex and the City and the L Word, they're representing bisexual people as people that have to pick a side and, or selfish because they want it all. And, it's that really, I had a lot of internalized biphobia to work through. And so once I got sober, I had this, when you get sober, you have a clearer headspace, and I was able to prioritize what I wanted to learn about, educate myself on certain things. I got more active in politics. I learned about my sexuality. So
you just had this whole awakening.
Oh, yeah. Totally. When I was saying earlier how I lived in an alternate reality, I really did. I didn't really care about a whole lot more than let's get wasted and let's go to a concert. And it was very I was a lot more of a shallow person and was way more impulsive. But now, I actually literally studied bisexuality and queer culture, and was able to actually take pride in the word bisexual. And, my partner is a man, and and we still celebrate my bisexuality. And that means, when I say that, I mean, he validates my bisexuality, and, it's to be with someone who validates that and honors that really means a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just think what you said there about the awakening and finding yourself through that sobriety. And I hope that your story just encourages somebody this evening that as you remove the alcohol, as you maybe even go to treatment to do that, as you get back to yourself, you begin to find all these amazing things about yourself, or all these things that maybe you weren't ready to admit to yourself. And I think that would be a beautiful process for people in sharing that. And I know that now you're even on this mission to help people to express themselves in recovery. Tell me more about these. I guess you're doing spoken word and all of this around the recovery community, and even specifically for the LGBTQ plus community. So tell me about your efforts there, just to break down some of these stigmas and get people to be open and start talking about this.
Yeah, I have a reading series, which is on hold right now for obvious reasons. But it was, I would create, or curate a panel of 5 or 6 people here in New York City. It's called Readings on Recovery. So it's a panel of people that would talk about their recovery journey. And, and it was very important to me to include all types of recovery, whether it's, substance abuse, alcoholism, sex addiction, gambling, eating disorders. Like I wanted to make sure all different types of recovery were discussed at these readings, because once I got sober, I realized that it's all the same. All of this is the same. My drug of choice was drugs and alcohol, and sometimes, and sometimes sex. But it's the same as, talking to people with eating disorders, talking to people with gambling addiction. We're all trying to self-medicate a thing, which is usually something, mental health related. And so it's really important to me to bring nuance to the recovery conversation. And then, within that, making sure that there's also LGBT community is represented, people of color are represented. So it's diversity in adversity, I would say is an important aspect.
Let's touch on that a little bit, about that diversity in recovery, because I know you mentioned people of color, but also, the LGBTQ plus community. Why do you think that's so important that we think about inclusivity? Because sometimes we don't talk about that enough.
Yeah, I could talk to you about this for hours, Joy. I think inclusivity and representation are so important, where, like I mentioned earlier, how bisexuality was represented on film and television, that led to a lot of internalized biphobia for me, where like, that's my only reference of bisexuality is this, and it's negative. Like, of course I'm going to have a negative feeling about being attracted to men and women. So, that's just an anecdote from my life. But when you apply that to, misrepresentation of people of color, people of other letters of the LGBT community, that leads to a lot of internalization, and that internalization can create trauma, which can lead to self-destructive habits, often substance abuse or eating disorders. Like, it is all connected. And if we can have a space where, we can talk about inclusivity, we can talk about diversity, not just talk about it, but actually have it, then we're hearing all these different perspectives, and we're realizing that we are, we're all one. Not to sound like super crunchy hippie there. Like I say,
this is important.
I know that we all have individual unique experiences, but if we can hear each other's different experiences, then I think that would just create a lot more peace in the world.
Oh, I love that. Like, I totally love what you said about if we can just relate, and because we're all on our own journeys, right? But there's something we can learn from each person's journey when we come together. So where are you now on your journey, Miss Tawny? What do you see that's next for you? We've been in the midst of this pandemic, now we're hopefully coming out of it, but where are you on this whole recovery journey as we wrap up this evening?
It is never ending, right? It is, I'm 5.5 years sober now, November of 2015. Thank you. So, I'm writing a book, I'm co-hosting a podcast. It's so weird that my sobriety is like my job. That's it's a weird thing. But I'm also working on appreciating today. That's a tough thing for me. I'm very goal oriented, almost to my fault, to like a detriment, where I'm like goals, achieve, to almost to the point of not appreciating the everyday moment and thinking that, a day off is lazy. And so I'm trying to juggle, a day job plus creative work and just being a human, being a partner, being a daughter, being like letting myself be all of these things and not let it just be like work. And I think that is part of my recovery journey, because it's also tied to mental health of, not thinking I'm enough, not thinking I'm doing enough. And hopefully next time we talk, I'll have, maybe I'll figure that out.
I think we're all in that place of, figuring it out. And I see people coming in saying, congrats to you on your 5 years of sobriety. And I know people have been inspired by you tonight, Tawny. And I want to give you an opportunity before we wrap up today, because there's probably somebody listening here who is in denial where you were 5.5 years ago. And they need to hear something tonight. Maybe there's something that might get them to go to treatment or seek help, or even just to start down this path of recovery. So if there's one thing you would say tonight to that person who's listening, what would be your words?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say my biggest moment was when I stopped comparing my relationship with alcohol to other people's relationship with alcohol. And what I mean by that is I would say, well, I don't drink as much as her, or at least I don't do that when I drink. Because when I was comparing what I wasn't, I was not seeing what I was. And that was not, I mean, that let me stay in denial, like, which is, it's tough. It's really tough to get out of that headspace. So I would say, stop comparing your relationship to alcohol with someone else's, and utilize being in the information age. Look up, you don't have to go to an AA meeting. You don't have to go to rehab tomorrow. Just read an article about sobriety, look up #sober on Instagram, buy a book about someone else's journey. Just, there's so many resources out there that, like, maybe you just need to cut back. Maybe you need complete abstinence, like, who knows, but just know that you're not alone.
Yeah. I think that's really big. And actually, when we wrap this up, for someone who does feel, because there's sometimes where people, like you said, like yourself, they can stop cold turkey and go down that, but there are also people who need help. And that's why we wanted to do this, do what we do, because at American Addiction Centers, we do offer people that lifeline for those who feel like they do need it. And so, like you said, there's many different paths to get there. And we thank you, Tawny, for sharing your journey, for being open. And, what you said really touched me in the end is, don't compare your journey to anybody else's. But if you were tonight finding yourself that the journey with yourself and your relationship with alcohol isn't healthy, that's a sign that you need to do something about it. So Tawny, this has been wonderful. We've learned so much from you, and thank you for just being so transparent. And that's going to do it for another episode of Addiction Talk, everyone. And everyone have a great night.